From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, theZoomer, hosted by Marissa Lennox.
Welcome to theZoomer. I'm Marissa Lennox. When a seasoned lawmaker falters or takes time to recover, questions about their fitness for office invariably surface. Like U.S. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who had a moment of confusion at a recent event.
What are your thoughts on running for re-election in 2026?
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute.
The incident, the second in just over a month for the longtime Kentucky senator, prompted voices, including former U.S. ambassador to the UN and Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley, to call for mental competency testing for aging politicians.
What I will say is right now the Senate is the most privileged nursing home in the country. I think that we do need mental competency tests for anyone over the age of 75. I wouldn't care if they did them over the age of 50. But these are people making decisions on our national security. They're making decisions on our economy, on the border. We need to know they're at the top of their game.
As President Joe Biden eyes re-election, 77% of Americans say he'll be too old to govern if he wins a second term. When asked what words first came to mind when they thought of the president, 41% of respondents answered with some combination of old, outdated, aging, elderly, slow, confused, and bumbling. In Canada, as we consider questions surrounding the age of politicians, it's worth noting that the House of Commons has a median age of 50, and the Senate, with an average age of nearly 66, enforces a mandatory retirement age of 75 for its appointed members. So on today's show, we'll ask, how old is too old? Let's put it to the panel. And David Crombie, I'll begin with you. With all your experience in public service and knowing what it takes to serve, should there be some kind of an age limit for politicians?
It's not an uncomplicated question, and you have to spend some time with the answer. I have, and I concluded that no, I wouldn't have an arbitrary age. I would not have one. It clearly is a factor. But I think people are allowed to take those factors into consideration, like general competence, not just incompetence because of age. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people are not competent. And so sticking it to age, I don't think so. And so I don't, any arbitrary age, no. Should it be a factor in consideration whether people should vote for you? Absolutely.
At least in the U.S., there are term limits for the executive branch. In Canada, there are not. Where do you stand on mandatory retirement, John?
Well, I don't think that there should be a mandatory retirement for politicians. I think much like what Mr. Crombie says, I mean, there's a lot of virtue in having people who understand what it's like to be older in our society and to have different priorities and empathy for them. So and plus experience does count for a lot in politics. I do think, however, that the public, if you ask them whether there should be some competency measure, they would say yes, except how do you administer such a thing? Like, who administers it? We saw it with Mr. Trump in the United States, and there's even a lot of controversy around that. So I think at the end of the day, it should be up to the constituents themselves to make the decision when they vote in or out.
Yeah, at least in what do you think about the idea, though, Brian? In Canada, senators have to retire at the age of 75. Federal judges have to retire at the age of 75. In some provinces, it's 70. So should the same rules apply?
I can see why there would be a mandatory retirement age for the Senate, because you can't vote them out. If you could vote them out, I would say no. The U.S. Senate is in some ways starting to look like our Senate did before the mandatory retirement age came in. And I just want to be clear, the current crop of senators, whether you like them or not, are hardworking people. But there was a time when you would literally see senators sleeping in the chamber, drool coming down. They were there so long. But I'll say this, even with the mandatory retirement age, there was a senator not that long ago that was dealing with Alzheimer's. Neither the party they belonged to nor their family made that clear, and they would be brought in for votes, not knowing what they were voting on. So I'm more in favor of competency testing and knowing, is someone able to do the job? You know, look at these gentlemen next to me. Absolutely. neither one of them is out of public life, really.
There ought to be safeguards, I think, for things like that, right?
But if, someone has Alzheimer's or like Mitch McConnell freezing, I feel horrible for him. Dianne Feinstein, she just stayed in too long. Nikki Haley's comment about the U.S. Senate being the most privileged nursing home, when you look at the average age, there's some truth to that because people aren't being forced out due to competency.
It does seem like a form of elder abuse where parties are putting politics ahead of someone's well-being, but it also seems like a form of age discrimination. Rudy, that you would be out at 75 in the Senate. In the Senate, that ought to be the place of sober second thought. That is where you put your older, wiser people to say, hang on, slow down, this isn't right.
I don't think there's a problem with having older, wiser people there, but, well, first of all, no, there shouldn't be an age restriction on anyone in terms of elected office. That should be up to the public, to the people that vote. It should be their right to decide who to represent them. I think that fundamentally in politics, I really believe in term limits. You can continue, but I don't think we should have professional politicians in general, or career politicians. It'd be good for somebody to run for a couple of terms, sit aside, stand aside, and in the subsequent elections, perhaps go back in if they like.
All right, Rudy, hold that thought. There's a lot to unpack, so stick around because we'll continue this discussion on the other side. Don't go away.